For those of you who were here yesterday, you would have heard some interesting presentations on identity management. And we're now going to bring those discussions back together with a technology panel on how to own your identity on the internet. So we've got a great lineup of panelists, and it's going to be moderated by the San Francisco-based research analytics firm BlockScience, the director of that firm. So if I can invite the panelists to come on stage. They're all ready now. And also your moderator as well, as I say, director of BlockScience, based in San Francisco. Please welcome Jonathan Gabler.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, good morning. Good to see so many of you here. We're going to have a panel on self-sovereign identity. For those of you who've been here yesterday, and not enjoyed the Australian temperatures here at Lake Zug. For those of you who have been here, you know that there's already been quite some attention on the topic. So I think we had 4 sessions on the topic. So what we're trying to add in this panel is to wrap up the topic a little bit, provide a couple of perspectives that you might not have heard, and we're also going to announce a new initiative here in Switzerland around SSI for corporate use cases. So before we do that, let me introduce our panel. Starting from the left, going to the right, we have Dr. Aleftina Dubai-Vitskai. Did I get that right? Joining us. She's a lecturer in blockchain technology at Luzerne University, and her research focus is on privacy-preserving distributed data management. Then we have Daryl O'Donnell joining us from CU Ledger. Some of you might have seen his talk yesterday. Daryl is the CTO of CU Ledger, and CU Ledger is very well known for a digital credential called MyCUID. And then we're joined by Abbas Ali. Abbas Ali is the global head of identity and KYC at R3, which is, of course, well known for the open source enterprise blockchain platform Corda. And last but not least, we're joined by Arno Parenthaler. He's a manager at Swisscom Blockchain and the head of the Swisscom Blockchain Academy. And to start out with, I thought let's get all on the same page and understand what is SSI and how is it different from other forms of identity? And Aleftina, if you want to take a stab at that.
Yes, thank you for introduction. So self-sovereign identity systems are the systems that combine distributed ledger technology and cryptographic technologies such as encryption or digital signature or zero-knowledge proofs in order to construct immutable identity records that are controlled and owned by the users to whom this identity belongs. So in fact, this identity is just a set of claims that can be issued and attested by different organizations and issued to the user, so that the user doesn't have to involve every time he wants to get access to the services, he doesn't have to involve one identity provider that knows all the information about him. So instead, once the user gets all those claims from different organizations, he can decide when he would like to share what and with whom. And then organizations that are service providers, they are then also can decide to which claims or which organizations they would like to trust to. And the cool thing is that it's actually the user who controls his identity and all these claims that he receives from different organizations.
Great, thank you. I was speaking to lots of people about SSI, and one of the things that I think causes a lot of confusion is the role of blockchain technology when it comes to SSI and self-sovereign identity. So I was thinking we can maybe clear this up by taking one example, which is yours, Daryl, MyCUID, and really understand what problems does blockchain solve in the context of self-sovereign identity, and what also does it not do? And maybe if I can add one more thing. One thing I often hear is that, hey, do I now have to put my personal identifiable information on the blockchain? You know, isn't that insecure? How does GDPR come in? So I think there's lots of confusion. Let's clear this up.
Yeah. So the role of blockchain for CU Ledger and for generally for SSI and verifiable credentials, it's actually very small. We estimate that somewhere around 99.999% of information is off-chain. All my personal information is not sitting on the chain. The only information for a credit union, for example, who's issuing a credential, is their public decentralized identifier, their DID. It holds their endpoints, their public key, that's it. We have about 10 or 12 ledger rights to commission a new credit union. If they want to cycle their keys, that's in a year. The rest of the information sits in my wallet, as an individual. So I hold it. It's been signed by the credit union, but very little is on the chain. So I don't actually have a GDPR problem in that the individual is carrying their own personal data. So there's not a question of personal data sitting on a blockchain. It's just basically in my wallet. If I don't want to use it, I don't use it. So actually, it's a very elegant GDPR solution.
So is it fair to say that, because MyCUID is one solution and you have one specific SSI framework, is it fair to say that in most SSI frameworks, blockchain technology is not really where you save any personal information, where you save any credentials on chain, but really it's more of an infrastructure to basically attest to those credentials?
Yeah, the blockchain effectively is used as the source of truth for PKI. Instead of being, I have to formally give you a certificate, no, I just go to the blockchain, in this case, Sovereign for us. That's our source of truth. That's it.
Got it.
So it's very simple that way. It's a lot simpler than PKI.
Got it. Abbas, you work with R3. That's a consortium of, by now, hundreds of companies, and your role is to build core dApps in the identity space. How do you get companies excited about SSI? How do you explain to them why they really should care about this topic?
Sure. So firstly, I think just to clarify, what we mean by SSI, and part of my role is working with business folks and explaining to them how this technology can benefit them. So for us, the most, I guess, fundamental difference between current identity systems and SSI is that in self-sovereign identity, the power over identity data sits with the end user. And touching on both the points that were raised by my colleagues earlier, and the fact that Facebook is in the news today, let's use that as an example. If you look at the way you manage your identity on Facebook, all of you have a Facebook account, and today you might use your Facebook login to access services with other providers or even other corporations, and you'd simply use your Facebook login, and they would be able to extract all kinds of information about you from Facebook, right? How many friends you have, what are your interests, what are your likes, where do you go travel? So for us, the most exciting part of this new, ecosystem is that tomorrow, if Facebook decides for political or economic reasons to revoke your account or revoke your access, you lose your identity and you lose access to all those other services. In the self-sovereign identity world, you don't, right? Facebook can restrict access to Facebook, but they cannot control your access to all the other services because that identity data sits with you, the end user, and only you have the power to revoke it. So for us specifically, the most exciting part of this for some of our corporate members and the banks and FIs that we work with is a fundamental shift in how they store this identity data, right? Identity is now becoming a liability. If you guys have seen all the media reports and news around breaches that are occurring today, there was a big one in the US by Equifax, which is a credit bureau, right? No one wants to store this data themselves anymore. Corporations are happy to let users manage and own their own data and only utilize it for authentication or verification as and when needed. So to us, one of the most exciting use cases is a mutualization of costs, so allowing organizations to shift that burden and liability of managing that information back to the user, and then allowing them to mutualize the cost of storing that information in one place with the user, as opposed to everyone maintaining that in their own data silos.
Thank you. Arno, you at Swisscom, you work with companies across different sectors. What are the use cases? So how does a good SSI use case look like in your experience? What are the use cases you found particularly powerful?
So we have a lot of engineers who are really active in the open source protocol development. They are part of the Sovereign supporting team, as well as Hyperledger indie core developers. And they have been developing quite some applications in the last 2 years, 1.5 years, I would say. And I think two use cases are really useful to understand. One being a more startup-y case for the end consumer, really relevant, and another one, which I'm going to explain, is a bit more corporate-heavy, right? Mm-hmm. So the first one which is an obvious case, I think, which we already touched a couple of times, is e-commerce. It's a problem we are all facing on a daily basis, depending on how much we buy online, obviously, but It's having multiple accounts across multiple shops, where we obviously give all those more financial and individual data to the owner of the online shop, right? So this is obviously a problem not only for us, not understanding anymore where is our data spread, right? We're losing the control of our own financial data, but that's a problem as well for the shop itself, from certain regulations that ask them to cancel data of us in case we request it, right? GDPR. So the next step then could be a federated model, right? Where we give the right to a certain third party to manage our financial data. This could be a sign-on with Facebook or a sign-on with Apple or whatever service you're using that is managing our financial data. So it's not a perfect process, right? And this startup that we supported wanted to create specifically for e-commerce purposes such a SSI solution where you are owning your own data, right? You have your own parameters, and you give to the shop certain access rights to certain parameters of your financial figures. And what is really nice there is that you as a consumer, you always know exactly which parameters you gave to whom. So you have a really good overview, right? You take out your SSI solution and you see exactly, okay, now this shop has this credit card credentials and this shop has those ones, right? That's one thing we supported, a startup which is known on the market. Then another case is in the pharmaceutical space, but not only there, obviously. So in an industry which is highly regulated, such as the pharma space, right, and that has a lot of suppliers. Imagine having 250,000 different suppliers, and you need to assess as an organization around the validity of the products, certain certifications around services, right, which is in that space obviously quite heavily regulated. So the difficulty there is mainly cumbersome processes, costs as an organization to really check all those parameters of your supplier, right? And the idea there is to build SSI solutions for third-party risk management. You know, as a procurement division, you have it much more easier to assess what product services your supplier, or actually if the supplier is allowed to act as a service provider within the industry. So these are two.
No, I think these make a lot of sense. So one question, though, you know, in my experience, if a company decides whether, for example, to adopt an SSI framework or a new technology, what's needed is an executive telling a manager, look, by end of October, I want it to happen, right? So yeah. Some person has to make a decision based on some business case, right? So, and I was thinking, Daryl, you've looked very much into the business case for MySEO Ledger. Can you share, like, where do the cost savings, for example, come from? Where are the benefits for corporates when they decide, do we do this or not?
Yeah, one of the things we found is that SSI identity by itself is never on the executive's mind. No one ever wakes up in the morning and says, I need a better digital identity solution. It's always a second or third order problem. The problem we're solving, number one, we have two main ones. One is a lot of credit unions are looking for second factor authentication. They don't want to give everybody Google Authenticate. It's too complicated. So they're looking to put a credential inside their own app. They will never actually see that they're using SSI. The big one on the financial side, though, is on call centers. Every CFO and CEO knows how many calls they get, how long each call is on average, and how much it costs them to service those calls. By throwing in a certificate and an app on the phone where they can authenticate within 10 seconds instead of anywhere between 40 to 180, the CFO is like, if I go from 180 to 140, I can cut off 5 full-time equivalents, I'm in.
So they look at a business case.
It's pure business case. In our case, they know they can get payback inside of 6 months. That's just on the call center. The cooler thing for me is that same authentication factor can be used for walk-in, call-in, as we're talking about, and log-in. So we can, all across the whole enterprise.
That sounds almost too good to be true. So if it's that clear of a business case, why are we not doing that? Why is the adoption so slow? What are the challenges that we still have to solve? And I want to maybe get Aleftina involved there because you've been looking into this from a couple of angles. What's in the way of, you know, getting this adopted?
So I think there are different types of challenges. So first is like to develop a system that's really compliant with the different regulations, or sometimes it's even lack of regulations that would actually allow this kind of identity management. Then it's also the question of adoption and also for the users to understand how this whole thing works. Because, for example, it's easy to say, okay, now you as a user, you can manage your identity, but then, well, how? How would I do it so that my privacy is protected? And what does it mean that my privacy is protected? Because many people think that my privacy is protected when I just don't share anything with anyone, but we all know that it doesn't work like that. So it's really the understanding of and the control over what I share, which means that I think we still have a long road to get this, to teach people how to manage this. And also all this regulatory and adoption also leads to the technical issues, because so distributed ledger technology and different cryptographic techniques, they still have to be improved. They have to be scalable enough. They have to be efficient enough, especially if we use some privacy protection techniques. So I think they're really from different perspectives, but I think by already knowing what we can do and for which kind of context we're already on our way.
Daryl, you have probably written the most comprehensive report on SSI wallets in the universe. I had to take 1 or 2 days off to actually read it, but I went through it. And can you maybe just pick 1 or 2 of the characteristics that current SSI wallets miss that we need for mass adoption?
Yeah, for clarity, I don't like writing reports. I did that because I was angry. There's been too much hand-waving. Wallet is my #1 problem. It's what keeps me awake at night. Right now, I'm giving you a credential that's no different than a debit card or a credit card. If you lose it, we can go through a process by which you can replace it. Very soon, though, we are going to be giving verifiable credentials that only exist in the wallet. If we don't back up and have a proper recovery mechanism that can't be gamed and social engineered so I can steal your wallet easily, what we've done, and the analogy I use, it's kind of crude, is that I've effectively given you a bunch of information. I've handed you a digital hand grenade, given it to you. It said, and I pulled the pin for you, by the way. And I said, don't drop this. At some point, until we deal with that, it's really hard. Otherwise, I can't give you the full value until you have a proper recovery mechanism that I can't steal from you.
How do you solve this at CU Ledger? Are you giving your members hand grenades?
We are backing up their wallet, but there is a passphrase. If you lose your seed, your whatever thing in the sovereign realm, with Evernym, our partner, I think it's an 8-word phrase, which I've already lost. And I'm the geek. So we're backing it up, and we have protocols in place that are already there, thankfully, at the credit unions that say, Abbas, you've just called in, let's start over. What's your mother's maiden name? What's your favorite pet and when did it die? Well, you don't actually ask that particular question. So we have protocols, but it's not the perfect answer yet.
All right, so it's recovery options for wallets. Yep. Any other challenges that you guys see for the adoption of SSI?
Well, for me personally, working with highly regulated institutions, it's a heavy lift, right? Identity, KYC, these are not the most risky businesses, right? No one wants to be the first to adopt new technology. So it's a lot of education, and it's a lot of, I think it's just a time game. We have to wait, we have to prove the technology, and go through the cycle. So it's going to take time.
I think one of the things that everybody's looking for when he thinks about SSI is this golden KYC record, right? That he can take from one bank to the other, and then the banks are super excited about it because they could save a lot of costs. So probably that's something that you've come across. Like, where are we on the regulatory side? And
we're not there yet, to put it simply. And I was going to talk about this. To me personally, it's probably the most interesting use case, especially in the FI space. You know, I relocated from New York to London about a year ago, and I'd been in New York for 20 years, banking with HSBC. I tried to open an account with HSBC in London, and they acted like they didn't know me. And you know, I had to go through this whole process again, and even though they're the same bank, they're different legal entities under different regulations in different jurisdictions, and the processes are quite different. So one of the use cases we're developing with some of our banks now is letting us carry those credentials, and this is the data passporting issues, right? HSBC US cannot just send that data about you to HSBC UK. You have to give consent to that. So by using a self-sovereign identity mechanism, you can actually allow other banks and other institutions to access the data under your control, and that kind of makes this process a little bit better. So next time you walk into your bank and apply for a mortgage or a credit card, they should be able to pull all that data they already know about you.
Got it.
Maybe another point which I would like to add there. I think if you look at the digital signature services that are around now for qualified or unqualified digital signatures, it took quite some while until they got used as well on a widespread means. So I think the next step of those digital signature services is the connection to decentralized identity. And I think if you are able to pass with the evolution of digital signatures along as well the SSI potential to jump on the wave, then we might speed a little bit up the adoption in that space.
So I think we've only scratched the surface of the challenges that are still ahead. So how long is it going to take until we have SSIs on our phones in our back pockets? And I was just thinking of Andreas Antonopoulos, who was here in Zurich on Sunday, and who always says using Bitcoin is like having a Swiss bank in your back pocket. How long is it going to take until we have our self-sovereign identity in our back pockets? Is that like a year, 3 years, 10 years?
I think the where it's used, at scale and all over our lives would be 3, 5, 10 years. The initial use case, you won't even realize you have it. It's just a thing you do. It feels like Apple Pay, or there's an app that has it embedded in it, and they've just moved the locus of control into your hands, but it doesn't make any difference to the user. It should be even easier.
Yeah, I think you need to differentiate a little bit between SSI in the corporate and public space. In the public space, you're driving much more in regulated problems, right? Huge masses that need to adopt this as well. But in the corporate space, I think this is happening right now, right? I mean, we see it with clients working on it. The complexity is much smaller. We can easily start an SSI solution for a little consortia.
I hate putting out timelines, especially on camera, but we're running pilots right now, and what I can say is that we expect to have some of these very early stage solutions in production environments by next year. Large-scale adoption, again, 5 to 10 years is probably more appropriate.
And that's a good segue. So where are we right now in adoption? So yesterday, I don't know who was here, we heard that there's some good stuff happening there in Canada. However, here in Switzerland, we're running an initiative called Swiss ID. On the World Economic Forum this year, there was a big talk about digital identity, and they talked about India, where they have 1 billion people already using digital identities, which is not a self-sovereign identity, but a state kind of organized, orchestrated identity. So is SSI going to become the new normal, or is it sort of staying a niche kind of technology? What's your bet?
Well, just talking about India, because that's used as an example of one of the most successful large-scale deployments. I mean, if you look at it from a privacy perspective, right, that would never fly in the US or in Europe, for example. You can track everyone's activities online through their unique identifier right now, the way the system's designed. But again, I think we have spoken to a couple of people there, and I think there's a push now to move towards more privacy-preserving identity mechanisms.
Got it. Time is running out. I wanted to deliver on the promise that we're going to announce a new initiative here around SSI in Switzerland. And that's Arno launching this initiative. Can you tell us more about the Swisscom blockchain think tank for self-sovereign identity?
Yeah, as some of you might know, Swisscom blockchain, subsidiary of Swisscom. We are a consulting firm, obviously, and since 1 year we're doing education as well. So we have this academy educating now I think the last 10 months around 550 people in Switzerland. What we are doing there is topics we know. We know blockchain, we know the technology, we educate you, we tell you how it works. But there are certain topics that are still not really like teachable, right? We need still to figure out, okay, what's the impact on certain industries, what are the barriers and so forth. So that's why we decided to create a think tank around SSI specifically for the corporate space, okay? So not private, public SSI topics. And yeah, so we are kicking off soon. We have now the seats full with all the experts. We are looking for corporates across the industries. We have Lucerne University writing a really nice report afterwards to really spread the news, spread the word around. We have in the board the Sovereign, we have R3 Corda, so we have the people who are working on this on a daily basis. Yeah.
So what can we expect as an output from that? There's a report coming out?
So there's a report coming out, so obviously we look for clients, larger corporates from different industries, so that we can have a holistic overview of, okay, which industry is going to be the first one really driving this forward. The other outputs are obviously corporate specific, right? The people who are involved in the think tank, they really understand the technology in depth, and yeah, that's the purpose.
And Aleftina, the university is also involved. What's your sort of motivation to get involved in this think tank?
Yes, exactly. So I think it's very important to have also this academic perspective on how things work. So the idea is not to just to study the technology and find the way to apply it in real settings. It's actually from the other way around, to look at what are exact requirements, which technology is actually best fit, and whether SSI is the best fit for these requirements, and then to see what improvements are still needed, whether this technology is mature enough, or what we still have to do in terms of research and development in order to actually be able to bring it back to reality and to satisfy all these needs that we will identify altogether.
Yeah, I agree. I want to add on that point that we are technology agnostic, okay? It's not that we are going to push one or other protocol back and forth, right? We are Swisscom, we are an independent public company, so we really look at what is really good, what is not good, you know, and then we tell the people where the journey is going.
All right, unfortunately, we're running out of time, and we were told that there's no Q&A, but I would say if there's a really, really good question, if you want to pose it now, then you can raise your hand and ask a question. If there's no questions, then we're going to wrap up. If you're interested, there is one, please. Did you guys can you speak up a little bit? It's hard to understand. That's a good question. You guys seen business models that, so basically I think the question is if I in the future can monetize my identity, right? Yeah. I think, I don't know if Brave Browser is going in that direction, right? I don't know if you know that project, but.
I do.
Yeah.
Kind of, but to answer from my perspective at least, we are working on a couple of use cases where the issuers of those credentials could monetize them, but not necessarily where the identity owner would use them. But that's an interesting one. We haven't really explored that here at R3. Be curious to know if someone else here is, you know.
We've looked at a simple example, well, kind of a weird example, that if someone walks into a car dealership, there's two types of people walk in. We call them tire kickers. They like to drive around in cars. They don't actually buy them, and then there's check writers. If I walk into a BMW dealership dressed like a bum, but you know that I'm worth X, and when I say I'm buying something, I always do buy something, you're going to treat me totally differently. So you can imagine on a click per ad, you're paying dollars. If I walked in, people will pay hundreds or thousands of dollars for that. Why wouldn't a credit union, if they're issuing a credential, and the individual perhaps, benefit from that? So that's certainly a capability. It can also be done in a privacy-respecting way.
Cool. I hope that answers the question. So unfortunately, we're out of time. If you're interested in trying out what an SSI solution actually looks like, I think, Daryl, you're around. You can demo that.
I would also suggest the best example I've seen to date is at Luxoft's booth.
At the Luxoft booth. And if you're interested in hearing more about the think tank, grab Arno, and please join me in thanking the panelists for this discussion.